This is the Dover Download Podcast. My name is Christopher Parker, and for the past 25 years, I've had the pleasure of working with, learning from, and talking to a variety of volunteer, staff, and community members. This podcast explores conversations, activities, and a variety of policies and programs which exist here in Dover to improve the community in one way or another. For just over a decade, the City of Dover has used an economic development tool called a public-private partnership to move forward on a variety of projects here in the community. Two of those projects are represented today by our guests, Eric Chinburg and Chad Kageleiry. I'm going to talk with Eric and Chad about the projects that we've invested in and partnered with them on, hear a little bit about their projects in general, and talk about why a public-private partnership is a good deal for all involved. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you, Chris.
So, as I said, we've done public-private partnerships with both of you. If you could, Eric, I'll start with you, maybe give the listener a brief overview of who Eric Chinburg is, what projects they might know you or what buildings they might know you on, and then we'll get into the public-private partnership a little after, but I want to do just a brief intro first.
Sure. I grew up in the area and almost 30 years ago started buying mills in the area, starting in Portsmouth and next in Dover. So our firm owns and operates the Washington Street Mill, the Cocheco Mill, the Picker House, and more recently, the Strafford County Courthouse, which is now we call our First Street project. And we also own the transportation lot and Smiley's, which both are potential projects for the future.
They're definitely a next step. Chad, what would someone know you from?
Dover resident, born here, and similar to Eric, about 30 years ago, started investing in property in Dover, both some larger buildings to turning from single-use manufacturing into multi-tenant, mixed-use commercial, more business forms, Heidelberg Harris over on Broadway, and a variety of other properties as well. We operate Summit Land Development and have a large footprint in Dover, like the demographics in Dover, and are focusing most of our residential and commercial growth in Dover right now.
The topic at hand is public-private partnerships. And in my mind, they work to link the development community's goals and the city's economic goals and objectives. And at their very core, it's the city identifying in conjunction with the private property owner an opportunity and saying, if we work together, this opportunity either might get accelerated or might happen altogether, because it might not have been a good site in the here and now, but we can incentivize accelerating that time frame. And it works to accomplish those goals, but also provide the public at large with a benefit as well. So that's really, in my mind, the three partners: the municipal corporation, the public, and the private property owner / developer. Does that sound fair to you?
Sums it up.
Spot on.
Yeah. So we have incentivized, that's our role, projects for both of you. Eric, you mentioned the courthouse project, and that was a project that I think could have gone one of two, maybe three ways. It could have either been demolished and someone would have come along, and then the cost for whatever resulting project, I think, would have been fairly astronomical. It could have languished sitting there forever. Or what I think probably would have happened, not by you, but someone, would have been to come in, demolish it, so that their tax burden was lowered, sat on it for a while, and then someone eventually would have said, okay, now I have to do something. You came in and said, here's my upfront cost. I want to save the building. Here's what I need from a unit count. Here's what I need from a general return on that investment. City helped me get there. And we worked out an arrangement with the 79E program, the Community Revitalization Program. But instead of just saying a strict 5 years of tax relief, we added on to that 2 more years through the affordable housing unit. But we also worked on finalizing the community trail easement out on transportation center lot and the transportation center lease itself, which is a slightly more complex conversation. But we sort of we leveraged it to come up with even more wins, I think.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, our ownership group owns that transportation lot, and we acquired this Strafford County old courthouse. And we have in our DNA is to try to save beautiful historic buildings, and that becomes sometimes more challenging than building new. And we knew that if we didn't get some help from the city, that this was not going to be economically viable. And New Hampshire has this excellent statute for just these situations called RSA 79E, which essentially is a deal between the developer and the city, where the city says, look, that property is not bringing any property taxes right now. If it doesn't get developed, it's going to keep bringing in very little property taxes. Okay, developer, you go invest millions of dollars and get it up and running, and we'll delay that incremental tax increase for a period of years, 5, 7, 9, even up to 11 in some cases. We've heard lots of people complain about that are locals that might not understand the benefit. And from my perspective, I say, look, the city's going to get taxes on that building for the next 1,000 years. There's going to be a little bit of a delay in getting the benefit of all that investment. But if it doesn't get improved, it's just going to languish. And we worked with Chris and the city of Dover and came up with a great plan, and we can talk more about it in a little bit.
So, Chad, the difference in the incentive with a couple of your projects has been identifying public improvements that are needed, roads, utilities, earthwork, et cetera, and saying, we'll reimburse you those costs. And
Right.
There's a complex formula we've used to identify what the true cost, what's a non-allocated cost. But the idea has been, you do that work that otherwise would be infrastructure the city would own, and then we reimburse you for those costs.
Right. So let's use the development of Stonewall Drive Industrial Park.
Yep.
It was an abandoned gravel pit that was producing nothing for the city except a target range for local
Right.
rifle fans. The site was big enough and well located enough that it works for a distribution facility and industrial park, but the cost of building a road system down through that park, down through that gravel pit, putting in a pump station, added enough to the total project cost where it made the likelihood less viable to bring in, a lot of industrial use. We made that the deal with the city. Now, there are two advantages to the city. One, they're getting industrial development with no risk and no upfront cost. In the past, the city would more typically buy a piece of land, do their own permitting, build the road, and hope to attract tenants and eventually fully develop the park. Enterprise Park, Industrial Park, 30 years ongoing, is still not sold out. So
Yes.
public, it's close, but it's not there yet. So, the one I did is already full. So the important part of that is this is what real estate developers do for a living. So let's say we're expert in it. And to try to have the city compete or do it their way and undertake the risk and spend the money up front without any certain return is maybe less wise than putting it on the developer to produce. And when they produce, then they get their reward. The city avoids risk, no upfront cost. In the long run, they get full taxation that it goes into the general fund, where that property, like in a 79E program, might otherwise sit unproductive for 1 year, 10 years, 50 years. Stonewall Drive, for example, that city, there was $1 million contribution by the city, which was important in the whole development pro forma. The city got that money back in a year and a half. I mean, that's how quickly it was returned. All of that money, those tax dollars now go right to the general fund.
One thing that you didn't mention on the Stonewall, and is reflective of what Eric and the city did on the old courthouse, is there are other components. In other words, Eric helped contribute to the community trail, the trailhead area, and an easement through the property. On Stonewall, you recognized that there was some leftover land,
Surplus land.
some surplus area, and said, I know there's athletic needs, there's recreation needs, we'll provide recreation opportunity. We did that as well out on Point Place with enlarging Appleville Park. So I think that's another component that we should be recognizing as well, is that instead of just saying, okay, we're going to put in a conservation easement or we're going to do away with it, we said, we're going to put a conservation easement on it, but it's a recreation conservation easement, and so you've got some multi-use fields out there as well.
Yeah, then we did the one field, and there was so much demand. There was an abutting property that was not subject to any type of public-private partnership, but there was kind of a need to complete the use of that field. So We purchased a dilapidated old house that had some acreage, took the house down, put a parking lot in, added a second field, and it's pretty much committed to the youth rugby program in the Seacoast. And I think this spring there were 80 games and several hundred participants that go in there. And that facility would never have been built if there wasn't the genesis that said, how do we get the ball rolling?
Right.
And that's one of the, I think, the highlights of this type of partnership, that it allows things to happen that might not otherwise happen.
From your perspective, how complex or complicated is it to do this? Is it just part of the financing and part of the process and you just background it, or is there an added level of annoyance with these projects?
I mean, from my perspective, we've done 79E in multiple communities because as mill redevelopers, you almost always need it to make a project work.
Sure.
But working with, a professional city staff like, we have in Dover, it was really quite simple. And it was a negotiation. We sort of rolled up our sleeves a little bit. And another city benefit as a result of them granting us the 79E tax relief was percentage of the apartments in the Strafford County Courthouse project are set up as attainable housing, which I think is affordable to those folks that are in the 80%, the median income category. And they were very reasonable working with the city on how to manage that 20% of these units. But I would say that it was another typical part of arranging a complex approval and financing package, but it was not onerous.
And Chad, we sort of took a similar approach on the Littleworth Road project, which is just getting underway, of you saying, you're hearing the conversation about attainable housing. You're hearing the need for that. You identified that the city owned a piece of property adjacent to your development piece and said, if you give me that, no cost, so that I can use it as part of my overall development, whatever density comes out of that will be attainable in the project.
Right.
And
whatever formula we agree.
Yeah, I'm simplifying it. The lawyers wrote it, but
the spirit of it was, there's a landlocked piece of land that the city can't use for development. They can't get to it.
Yep.
I had it surrounded, but I'm like, if you give that to me, it's in everybody's best interest in the community to provide for some more attainable housing. So the percentage of units that we get in the entirety that could be allocated to that acreage, that's the number of attainable units that we'll produce out of the several hundred that we have up there. So what happens? The city sheds a piece of land that's doing absolutely nothing for it. I also have to put that same acreage into conservation throughout the entire project. So there's no less green space, but it's probably going to be in the neighborhood of 70 attainable housing units sprinkled throughout that entirety that wouldn't have shown up for the benefit of the community had we not put that feature into our agreement. So I think when you get into a trusted partnership, you start looking for ways to say, okay, how can we make this a little better? So we can all, it serves all plates, so to speak. And that's a good example of how that happened.
I said earlier that you two are two of the entities we've done these arrangements with. We've done maybe 3 or 4 others. One of the reasons that we've come back to both of you and said, in your case, Eric, how can we do another one? And we've talked about some opportunity. And Chad, we've said, how can we do another one? We've actually done a few others,
right.
Littleworth being the most recent. Is that, to your point, Eric, there's conversation and there's negotiation, but there's not argumentation. It's been here's my goal, here's your goal, how do we get to that goal? And creatively looking at each side and saying, we need to come out ahead and we need the public to come out ahead. So let's not waste time arguing about it. Let's just do it. A couple of them, one in particular I'm glad is done, was a headbanging against the wall because they argued about the formula.
Right.
And the formula is the formula. I mean, it works. So show me how it can be amended and evolve, which we did on Littleworth. We tweaked the formula for that, but there was baseline for showing that. But it wasn't you should be happy that I'm here. How are you going to incentivize me conversation? Those, I think, we haven't had success with, and we don't want to replicate because they don't create a partnership. Right? To your point, Eric, the goal, from my perspective, is we should actually be happy to work together and proud of the resulting project collectively, not we got it done, but we got it done.
And Chris, you've been a leader in this for a long time when you started with the form-based code, all the things that you've done where you've always been, quote unquote, open for business as a leader in the city, which encourages developers to come in. And, we've each done equally good projects in other cities where the relationship is always where they look very skeptically at developers. And, I've gotten to the point in my career where I don't want to go work in a city where it's not kind of almost a trusted partnership like this.
Likewise, I'm focusing here now. I'm like, I want to be able to drive by it every day and go, what's going on, to kind of keep an eye on everything. And, people say, why do you focus on Dover? And I'm like, well, if the goal is to catch fish and we're just doing really well fishing in this one pool, just keep fishing. So I think the environment in City Hall is really, really conducive to some creativity and producing good projects.
I have said before, I appreciate your comments, Eric, but I've said before, if we did not have positive thinking policymakers, the city council, the planning board, the industrial development authority that say you should be working with developers, not against them. If we didn't have that mentality at the top, we wouldn't be open for business. We could be one of our neighboring communities that clearly says the 748th person that moves here is going to ruin it. So we don't want more people. We don't want more industry. We want to be a sleepy little town. We could have made that choice. But the community and the policymakers said, no, we want to continue to evolve. We want to continue to grow and redevelop. And that has been liberating on the staff side because we can say to folks like yourself, how do we creatively solve this problem? Yes. And then know that we can go to the council and say, you gave us direction to get this done. Here's what we got done. Are you going to approve it? Because just as you don't want it, I don't want to show up at a public hearing, have the world come out against the project, and then have the council say, thanks for all the negotiation, but we're not interested.
I think it would be interesting if you could, as kind of a follow-up with this topic, go and put your finger on a half a dozen of these. And I think you'd find a tendency that they're the more aggressive, more progressive, and more interesting projects that are showing up. And sometimes you just need that little bit of an advantage as a developer to go, yeah, I could do this, but it would be really, really interesting if I could go there. I got to close that gap. And I mean, the courthouse or Point Place or Stonewall, there's a variety of other ones that maybe have a different flavor than a project that hasn't been incentivized in such a way.
I won't go into details, but it was a project that property owner approached me. They own a decent sized lot downtown. And they said, here's our option. We're going to put $2 million into it and clean it up, or we'll put $15 million in it and do a whole new aggressive, to your point, project. And we worked out a lot of the format, the process. And then they came back and they said, we need an 11-year 79E. And I said, our policy is we go up to 5 unless you're going to do the attainable housing. And they said, we have no interest in attainable housing. We have no interest in that sort of mentality. And by the way, we don't want to now do commercial on the first floor.
So they're asking for too much.
And I said, that's our walk point. Right? Like, we're interested in redeveloping that property. We're interested in some of the public trade-offs that we were going to provide, that they were going to, it was in their benefit, and we could see the value beyond that. But you cross the line, right, and you're just done.
It has to be fair.
And I got up and walked out of the room, and they called me and they said, we didn't think you'd actually walk out. And I said, and I've said this to you both, I'm blunt. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Right.
And I don't want to waste your time or my time.
Right.
And I told you it was wasting my time, and we walked. And they said, well, we're not crawling back. And I said, great, put your $2 million into your project.
Right. Yeah.
And they did.
Right.
And someone else will come along and have the vision and be able to say, this is what it's going to take, and that's what we'll do.
I always think that's a shame because it what's obviously gives not a great name to certain aspects of this business that we're in. We've had similar things happen on the other side of that, where you've been talking about a 20% attainable component, and you get pretty far along, and then they sense that the winds are at our back, and then the municipality says, well, you know what, we really want 40%. And then that's right, well, that's where we can't do that.
Yeah, and I think that is, one of you said, if you don't trust the other party, regardless of what side you're on, it doesn't work. And so one of the reasons why it works to have these conversations with you both is the city trusts you. You have proven track records, and you trust the city because we've said what we've done and we've done what we've said.
I think that they should have a new something in their code that trusted developers really just don't need any permitting.
Yeah, well, I've been proposing for a while for those who qualify, the open zone. Just, I know you're going to do a good job. Just go do it.
Okay, we're reaching for too much.
You can always ask.
Live free or die.
That's right.
Is there any reason other than not trusting your partner that you wouldn't look to enter into some sort of arrangement? Is there something we should be looking at as a change in the project or process, or is there another thing other than that trust factor that would concern you about entering into an agreement?
Personally?
Wow.
Or like industry-wide. I can see why someone else might be reluctant if they haven't done one yet.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, geez, what's it going to be like to have the city as a partner? And the fear of that unknown might cause them to be like, oh, when's the hammer going to drop? Or what do I have to do? Or who's really in charge? But having been through it a few times, it's like, no, you can kind of lay it out and be reasonable how it gets laid out and presented, and, have pretty good information and pretty good numbers so everybody has a clear picture of what's expected.
I think
no reason
about
for me not to keep going.
Your point about the excess landlocked piece at your current project, where you just said, hey, I got an idea. I mean, you can't ask for anything more than that. You have a creative idea, you bring it up, you hash out a few details, and it's a win-win.
And that was an amendment to the original.
Yeah.
Because I saw that. I'm like, just makes no sense. Why not kind of enroll this in some way? And here's the trade-off. And it's going to work out great.
So directly answer your question, I can't think of something that's missing when you are able to have such a broad-ranging conversation about no one would have ever considered that. And you brought up a whole new idea and then ended up with a deal that everybody won.
Any last words? Anything you want to share with the listener?
No, I'm just thankful that, again, the mindset in City Hall is let's find ways to get good things done. Whereas more so in the past and in other communities, it's been, why do I have to run through a gauntlet to do something good? All right. Why do I have to continue to get all this resistance when at the end of the day, we're just trying to produce something that for the most part is a benefit to the community? And I think Dover's taking a little bit different look at that and going, show me what you got and let's make it happen.
Yeah. Get it done.
Yeah.
Yeah. Open for business. And that word gets out in the development community.
I appreciate you both coming in today, and I look forward to working with you both in the future.
Likewise. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Dover has a wealth of history in its over 400 years of existence. Coming up, Mike Gillis is going to share some of that history with us.
This week in 1911, Dover firefighters boarded a train bound for York Beach. Not for a holiday, but to help battle a wildfire that threatened to consume parts of the coastal resort town. In an era long before mutual aid agreements, digital alerts, or fire trucks speeding down highways, Dover's response meant loading up the steamer and hose wagon onto a special Boston and Maine train and rushing toward the flames by rail. At 1:15 on the afternoon of July 13, Dover Fire Chief James Smith and a 20-man detachment clambered aboard a specially called Boston and Maine train from Dover, hauling steamer J.S. Abbott No. 4 and hose wagon No. 4, laden with some 1,400 feet of hose, bound for Portsmouth and then on to the fire lines of York, Maine. Upon arrival at Portsmouth barely 15 minutes later, the men transferred their apparatus to waiting flat cars and pressed on to York Beach. When they arrived at the York Beach station just 34 minutes after leaving Portsmouth, a remarkable feat at the time, they were met with horses and wagons to carry their gear the final miles. The fire, tearing through hundreds of acres of pine forest, was bearing down on cottages, stables, and the Passaconaway Inn. The local hydrant pressure was poor and the air thick with smoke, but the Dover crew went to work with buckets, shovels, and whatever water they could find. They weren't alone. 100 sailors from the USS Montana and Tennessee, docked at Portsmouth, also arrived by special electric car, trading their white uniforms for soot-covered faces and blistered hands. They battled shoulder to shoulder with firefighters and locals, saving buildings by setting back fires and forming human lines of defense against the encroaching blaze. Despite the chaos, only one structure, a large ice house, was lost. Dover's steamer J.S. Abbott No. 4 and her crew helped hold the line. After 6 hours of relentless effort, the exhausted contingents reconvened at York Beach Depot, laden with hose, blackened clothing, and hands blistered by bucket handles. At about 8:20 p.m., they boarded the special train for home, rolling back into Dover at roughly 10 p.m. to the grateful cheers of relatives and curious neighbors. In an era before motorized pumpers and radio dispatch, these firefighters' swift, coordinated rail response and raw determination stand as testament to a time when every blaze was a logistical marathon and passing the bucket was both literal and life-saving. Today, a call for help between towns is answered in minutes by radio, but in 1911, it took trains, horses, and pure grit, and Dover answered the call.
Thanks for listening to the Dover Download this week. If you like what you heard, subscribe through your favorite podcast aggregator. And if you have something you want to hear a topic on, let us know. Finally, this is just one of the many ways we share information about the city of Dover. You can subscribe to the Dover Downloads email newsletter every week or other newsletters that we have by going to the City of Dover homepage, www.dover.nh.gov. Have a great week.